Welcome to the Very Reverend William McMillan Library. Now, an important part of our work in the library is the conservation of the books, particularly the older books and those that are in need of special care and attention. And recently we had a book restored. We had a book fully restored, which also happens to be the oldest book in the library collection. And it's this book here. This book dates back to 1686, and it's recently been restored by David Dunlop in the Belfast Bookbinding Company. And it has been restored, but if you'd seen the book before it was restored, it was hardly recognisable as a book. It really was in very poor condition and really could be described more like pieces of a book rather than a book. So really it's much more than a restoration. Before it was restored, it was really hardly a book at all, just broken pieces of what had been a book. And you can see them here. It was in a terrible state with the spine broken and the leaves torn out. And the cover had almost entirely disappeared. Now, when a restorer conserves a book, he tries to use as much of the original features of the book in the restoration. So all the cords that tied the pages together are used inside the book. And there's very little left over, but there was this tiny scrap of the cover left over, and on the front of the cover there was a tiny corner left of the engraving, just a tiny little piece which told us what the pattern was like on the book. And David Dunlop, who did the restoration, was able to identify this as part of the pattern that had originally been there, and he was able to replicate the pattern on our restored book. The pattern is called a Cambridge panel, and David engraved it on the front and the back of the cover. And this was the most popular form of binding in the 1680s. So it's absolutely authentic for the era. And Cambridge University explains a Cambridge panel like this. The binding style known as Cambridge panel began to appear in England in the late 1680s, and it became established as the most popular design for straightforward leather-covered work during the first few decades of the 18th century. It's characterized by a pattern of concentric panels sprinkled or stained to different levels of density to achieve a 2 or 3 tone effect. It was first used in Cambridge around or shortly after 1690, although it's been called Cambridge panel since the 19th century. The name is particularly unfortunate as it did not originate in Cambridge, nor was it especially practiced there. Many more such bindings were made in London than in Cambridge. So our book originally, we know, was printed in London, and we know it will have been bound in London. But it's been engraved in exactly the style of its time, exactly as it would have looked in 1686. Now, the book was published in England, in London, and the title page says, "Printed for William Crook at the Green Dragon without Temple Bar, next Devereux Court." And it has the date 1686, although the date 1684 is also found in the book. But we can imagine this later 17th century printer making the book, probably not binding it though, that would have been done somewhere else, although probably also in London. And there are a couple of names in the book. One is Gavin Duncan Rafferty, who seems to have been the first owner. And the other name, which is written on the title page, is Richard Aston. Now, the book is a translation of Homer by Thomas Hobbes. Now, the title says the Iliads and Odysseys of Homer, but the book only, in fact, contains the Iliad. Now, Homer was an important ancient Greek poet born in about the 8th century BC. His work became one of the foundations of our literature and remains of abiding importance from that day to this. And as I understand it, the Iliad tells the story of the quarrel between King Agamemnon and Achilles during the last year of the Trojan War. And these epic poems existed originally as oral accounts that were spoken rather than written down, and were later recorded in Greek and later still translated into other languages. So our book is translated by Thomas Hobbes of Malmesbury and published in 1686. Now actually Thomas Hobbes died in 1679, and this was the third edition published posthumously. His version of the Iliad was first published in 1676, and it's worth noting that by that time he was 88, so the translation is quite some achievement. And Thomas Hobbes was actually quite an important political philosopher who wrote an influential book called Leviathan, but he also translated this book. So we took it to the Belfast Bookbinding Company Limited, and we were pleased to be able to go and collect it recently. And here's Kathy and Sue taking delivery of the book from the binders. And it's lovely to have it back in this beautiful condition in the library. So there it is, Homer's Iliad, written by Homer sometime in about the 7th century BC, translated into English by Thomas Hobbes in 1676, and published in this edition in 1686, and now beautifully restored and held here in our library in Dunmurry.